It was meant to be just another promotional interview. Lights, cameras, the usual fake laughs, and a few flattering stories for the audience. But what happened on that stage between Clint Eastwood and Sandra Bullock would leave not only the host speechless, but the entire room frozen in stunned silence. The show had kicked off with high energy. The host, known for steering conversations with charm and sarcasm, welcomed the legendary Clint Eastwood and the ever-graceful Sandra Bullock onto the couch. The crowd roared, two Hollywood icons side by side. What could possibly go wrong? But within minutes, the mood began to shift. Clint sat unusually quiet, his sharp eyes scanning Sandra in a way that was far from casual. Sandra, always poised, smiled through it, but there was tension behind her laughter, like she knew something was coming. Then, the host brought up a seemingly innocent question. "You two have never done a film together. Isn't that a missed opportunity?" Clint chuckled, but not the warm kind. It was the kind of laugh that came just before someone dropped a truth bomb. He turned his head slowly toward Sandra and said loud enough for every microphone to catch, "Maybe, if she hadn't lied to me back then, things would have been very different." You could hear a pin drop. Sandra froze. The host looked like he'd seen a ghost. No one moved. No one laughed. The energy in the room had flipped from light-hearted to electric, as if the entire world had just shifted slightly off axis. And in that moment it became clear. Something had happened between Clint and Sandra long before this show. Something no one ever expected would surface, but it just had. Live on national television. The silence lingered for what felt like an eternity. Clint's eyes never left Sandra's face, and the weight of those words hung heavy in the air. The host, still stunned, tried to regain control, but the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. The audience, sensing the tension, sat on the edge of their seats, hungry to know what lay beneath that cryptic statement. Sandra's smile faltered for the first time. She took a deep breath and finally spoke, her voice steady, but laced with a hint of regret. "It's true. There's a past between us, one that most people don't know about." She glanced at Clint, who nodded slightly, his expression hard but calm. "We met decades ago, before either of us became household names. We were both young, ambitious, and yes, there was something between us, but things didn't end well." The host leaned in, eyes wide with curiosity. "What happened?" Sandra's eyes darkened for a moment. "I made a mistake, a lie that cost us a lot. At the time, I thought it was the only way to protect myself, but it ended up hurting Clint deeply." Clint's voice broke through, low and steady. "It wasn't just a mistake. It was betrayal, and it's something I never forgot." The crowd was spellbound. This wasn't the polished Hollywood story they expected. This was raw, real, and painful. The glamorous masks had slipped, revealing scars beneath the surface, scars that had shaped who they both were today. The host, regaining some composure, asked, "Have you ever talked about this before, publicly or privately?" Sandra shook her head. "Never. Not like this." Clint's gaze softened slightly, but the tension remained. Maybe it's time the truth came out. No more hiding. As the cameras rolled, the weight of their shared history filled the room, leaving everyone wondering, what was the lie? And how had it changed everything between them? The room was silent except for the faint hum of the studio lights. Clint's steady gaze locked with Sandra's, as if demanding honesty not just from her, but from himself as well. The host, sensing the gravity of the moment, allowed the silence to stretch, inviting them to reveal the truth. Sandra took a deep breath and began, her voice barely above a whisper. Years ago, when we were both struggling actors trying to find our place in Hollywood, I told Clint I had never been involved with anyone else professionally or personally. I wanted him to trust me, but that wasn't true. She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. At a critical time, I lied about a relationship I had with someone powerful, a person who could have made or broken my career. I said I was alone, but I wasn't. I thought keeping that secret would protect him, and myself. Instead, it drove a wedge between us. Clint nodded slowly, the hard edge in his voice softening for a moment. That lie didn't just break trust. It almost destroyed everything we could have built, personally and professionally. I was blindsided. The host pressed gently. Did this lie impact any of your careers directly? Sandra nodded. Yes. It affected decisions, opportunities, and ultimately led to us going our separate ways. I buried the truth for years because I was afraid of losing everything, including Clint's respect. The tension in the room was palpable. This was no ordinary Hollywood scandal. It was a story of trust, betrayal, and lost chances. Clint's voice cut through the quiet, but life has a way of bringing you back to the people you're meant to face. No matter how much time passes, that's why we're here now. The audience sat captivated, caught in the unfolding drama that was as real as any film they'd seen. The studio lights dimmed slightly, casting long shadows across the set. Clint and Sandra exchanged a glance that held decades of unresolved tension and unsaid words. The host, sensing the story was nearing its climax, gently probed, "After all those years, what finally brought you two back together?" Sandra's expression softened, a rare vulnerability shining through. "It was unexpected. I ran into Clint at a charity event a few months ago. Neither of us knew what to expect, but the moment was charged with everything we hadn't said." Clint nodded, his voice steady but reflective. "That night, we had an honest conversation for the first time in years. No lies, no pretense. Just two people who shared a complicated past, trying to find closure." The host leaned in, captivated. "And?" Sandra took a deep breath. "We realized that the pain we carried had held us back, not just from each other, but from ourselves. It wasn't about rekindling a romance. It was about forgiveness." Clint smiled faintly. Forgiveness is the hardest thing to give, especially when you've been hurt deeply. But it's also the most freeing. The audience watched, enraptured, as two of Hollywood's biggest stars shared their truth, a tale of love, lies, and, ultimately, redemption. The host, usually quick with witty remarks, simply nodded in respect. The stage was set for the final revelation. The room held its breath as Clint and Sandra prepared to reveal the final piece of their story, a secret that had remained buried for years, one that explained everything and left the entire audience stunned. The host leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it that you've never told anyone before?" Clint's voice was steady, but heavy with emotion. "After that night when everything fell apart, I spent years carrying the weight of that betrayal. But what I learned was this: sometimes the hardest truth is not the one we fear, but the one we need to face to move forward." Sandra nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of regret and hope. The lie wasn't just about protecting myself or my career. It was about survival in an industry that often demands sacrifices no one talks about. But what I failed to realize was that keeping secrets from Clint was also a betrayal to myself. Then, with a deep breath, Clint revealed the final shocking truth. The person I thought I had lost forever was never truly gone. We had been living parallel lives, each hurting and growing, but never fully apart. And now, we stand here ready to start anew, not as lovers, but as two people who have faced the darkness and chosen to walk into the light together. Sandra smiled, a genuine warmth radiating from her. This is our new beginning, built on honesty, forgiveness, and a shared respect for the journey we've both endured. The host, still absorbing the weight of their words, finally broke the silence. Thank you for sharing this with us. It's a powerful reminder that behind every story, there's a deeper truth waiting to be told. As the cameras stopped rolling, Clint and Sandra exchanged a look, one filled with mutual understanding and the unspoken promise of a future unburdened by the past. The audience erupted in applause, not just for the revelations, but for the courage it took to tell a story so raw and real. And for Clint Eastwood and Sandra Bullock, it was a moment of closure, and the start of something completely unexpected.